Okay, just listen to this for a second. That sound you're hearing, that's not some Hollywood sound effect. That's real. Pulled from archives, that's the sound of a major American city basically screaming under an orange sky.
Yeah, it's October 30th, 1984. And for most places in the U.S., it's mischief night. You know, the night before Halloween. We're talking pranks. Soaping windows, maybe some TP in the trees. Annoying stuff, sure, but basically harmless teenage fun.
But Detroit was different. The sky wasn't dark. It was literally glowing orange.
Yes.
On that night, which people there called Devil's Night, and in the few days around it, the city saw over 800 fires. 800.
And let's be really clear here. We're not just talking small stuff like dumpsters or bonfires in empty lots, though there are plenty of those too. No, this was hundreds of structure fires, homes, apartment buildings, garages, businesses, just consumed by flames. It was this unbelievable annual ritual of self-destruction.
And here's the really chilling part. The core truth we have to grapple with. Our sources, articles, reports, oral histories, they all make it crystal clear. This wasn't a natural disaster. It wasn't war, not an attack from outside.
No, the destruction was coming from inside the city itself.
Okay, so we're going to unpack this. We've got a stack of sources detailing the stats, the human cost, everything behind this ritual. Our mission today on the deep dive is to really get into it, connect the dots, the economy, the politics, the racial dynamics, and try to answer that huge, almost impossible question. Why? Why would a great American city do this to itself year after year, burning itself down? Welcome to the deep dive.
All right, before we jump into the big picture, the stats and the history, I think we need to see the human side of this. To really get the intensity of Devil's Night, you have to meet the people who are stuck right in the middle of it. We sort of synthesize the counts to create two composite witnesses. They really show the fear and the exhaustion of living through this. Absolutely. The build-up to the end of October, it was just debilitating for people. Let's start with Frank. He's our composite firefighter, a veteran. Been on the job 20 years by 84. He's watched the numbers climb year after year. And the crews, they didn't call it Devil's Night. They called it Devil's Week. It started days before the 30th. That dread just built.
And Frank knows going into that night, he's not just fighting flames. The risk is totally different.
Completely different. I mean, look, Detroit already had a high number of fires. On a normal day, maybe 30 structure fires, which is a lot.
Yeah, that's a high baseline.
Right, but on Devil's Night, that number would just explode.
Yeah.
But Frank's immediate worry, that knot in his stomach, it's that he and his crew are driving into neighborhoods where they aren't seen as rescuers anymore.
That's a really crucial point. The sources emphasize this heavily. In 84 Detroit, the city itself, the police, the fire department, all of it was often seen as, well, as part of a system that had failed people deeply.
Exactly. So Frank is worried he's seen as part of the problem, an agent of the government that basically abandoned these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
He's driving this huge fire engine into utter chaos, knowing there's a real chance people will throw bricks, rocks, maybe even shoot at them just for trying to hook up a hose.
Just unimaginable pressure. And then there's Eleanor, the resident. She's lived in her house, say, on the Near East Side for 40 years. She remembers the good times. Streets full of families, neighbors chatting on porches, you know, lights on in every window.
But by 1984, that street it's like a skeleton. She figures maybe half the houses on her block are just empty shells, derelict, abandoned.
And the fear for people like Eleanor, it was so personal, so immediate. On October 30th, she's not inside hiding. No, she's outside. It's cold, late October, right? She's bundled up, standing on her lawn with the garden hose, just spraying her own roof, soaking it down.
And her eyes are glued to the abandoned house right next door. She calls it a tinderbox. She knows it's a target.
That image, one woman, a garden hose against this citywide inferno. It just perfectly captures the frustration, the feeling of being utterly left alone. Residents had been begging the city for years, tear down these empty houses, they're dangerous. But nothing happened.
Right. The complaints just vanished into bureaucracy. So now it's down to this, defending your own home with a hose from a fire intentionally set right next door.
So how did all this kindling get everywhere, and why couldn't the city cope? We have to look at the deeper wounds, the ones that never really healed.
Exactly. Wound number one has to be the scar left by 1967. That 5-day conflict, some call it a riot, others a rebellion, an insurrection, depends who you talk to. It fundamentally altered the city's path.
The immediate toll was horrific. 43 people dead, thousands injured, and over 1,000 buildings burned to the ground.
But the long-term impact was arguably even worse. The sources are unanimous on this. 1967 massively accelerated white flight. Residents, businesses, capital. They just flooded out of the city into the suburbs or left Michigan entirely.
And that just gutted the city's tax base, right?
Right. Completely gutted it. Permanently. It crippled Detroit's ability to pay for basic services, let alone invest in rebuilding or recovery.
And the physical scars remained? That's critical here. Those 1,000-plus buildings that burned in '67, many were just left.
Never rebuilt. Never even torn down. For almost 2 decades, they just sat there. Charred shells. Rubble. Like these visible open sores all over the city. Constant reminders of the violence, the neglect, the city's inability to heal itself.
So that's the deep social, racial wound. Festering, then there's the second wound, the economic hemorrhage.
Yeah, Detroit wasn't just a car city, it was the motor city. The arsenal of democracy. Built the cars, built the tanks, the industrial heart of the world for a time.
But by 1984, that engine was sputtering.
Dying.
And we often think, oh, it was the oil crises in the '70s that killed Detroit. But the sources show a much longer, sadder story. Auto industry jobs in Detroit, they actually peaked way back in 1950, when the city had almost 1.8 million people.
Well, that early. That early. After 1950, it was just this slow, steady bleed. Automation, factories moving out the city core, decentralization. It went on for decades.
So by the time the oil shocks hit in the '70s,
The industry was already incredibly weak. Those crises forcing Americans toward smaller, more fuel-efficient cars, often imports, they weren't the start of the decline. They were more like the final brutal blows, as one source put it. They finished off thousands of remaining jobs, devastated the working and middle classes.
and the physical result of that collapse.
Staggering. You had these giant factories, like the Packard plant, huge parts of the Ford River Rouge complex just falling silent, becoming these massive multi-story tombstones across the landscape.
And the houses.
Tens of thousands of abandoned houses, empty storefronts, entire subdivisions just rotting away. People simply walked away.
And that becomes the fuel for Devil's Night.
Precisely. All those empty buildings, decades of economic collapse and neglect, meeting those unhealed wounds from '67. It created the perfect storm. Dry, abandoned wooden structures scattered across 139 square miles,
Yeah.
just waiting for a match. The city was, in a physical sense, set up to burn.
Okay, so the stage is set. A city weakened, broken, exhausted, structurally vulnerable. But how does a tradition of, harmless mischief night pranks turn into this annual mass arson?
Well, it wasn't overnight. It was this slow, creeping escalation. It really started to turn dark in the late 1970s. Mischief Night, which, started as a pretty innocent European thing, began reflecting the decay in Detroit. So instead of just toilet paper, you started seeing small fires. Trash cans, dumpsters, maybe an abandoned car set alight.
And the numbers started ticking up.
They did. The fire counts went from, a few dozen a year to over 100 fires annually, starting around 1979. Every year, a few more. The ritual was definitely changing, accelerating, moving from pranks to something genuinely destructive, malicious even.
And the year right before the big one, 1983.
By '83, the count for the Halloween period hit an astounding 553 fires, according to reports. So everyone knew. The city knew, the residents knew. This wasn't some sudden explosion in '84. It was a known, expected annual disaster getting worse each year.
Which means, with that sheer number of fires peaking at 810 and '84, there can't be just one single reason why people are doing this.
Absolutely not. It was a mix, a really toxic cocktail of different motives, all swirling together in the chaos. Our sources point to basically 3 main drivers.
Okay, let's break those down.
Motive A, calculated criminality. This is the really cynical one. It even got a grim nickname, Insurance Job Night.
Insurance job night. Wow. Okay, explain that. It sounds almost too blatant.
It sounds blatant, but think about the context. It's 1984 Detroit. The real estate market has collapsed in many areas.
Yeah.
If you own a building, maybe an apartment block, a commercial property in a neighborhood that's just falling apart, or maybe it's already been condemned. You can't sell it. It's worthless. Maybe even costs you money to keep.
Right. Negative value.
Exactly. But if that building happens to burn down in a mysterious fire during the citywide chaos of Devil's Night, maybe you can collect the insurance money.
So Devil's Night provided the perfect cover.
The perfect cover. Hundreds of other fires are burning. Some are pranks, some are other things. Arson investigators are completely overwhelmed. How do you prove this specific fire was deliberate arson for profit when the whole city's burning? The random fire set by kids provided the fog of war, as one report called it.
Did the insurance companies catch on? They must have.
Oh, they had to. It got so bad that companies started drawing red lines around whole zip codes in Detroit. They'd severely limit coverage, jack up the rates, or just flat out refuse to write new policies.
So they were essentially starving those areas of capital.
Pretty much. Some sources even found policies with specific Devil's Night exclusions. They basically said, look, this annual thing, that's a known risk we just can't cover anymore. Which, of course, just made more buildings impossible to maintain or insure.
Which creates a vicious cycle. More derelict buildings, more fuel for next year. Okay, but that's property owners. That doesn't explain the kids setting fires.
No, it doesn't.
Wow.
Which brings us to Motive B, Twisted Street Justice.
Twisted street justice. Okay.
You have to remember the timing here. Mid-'80s. The crack cocaine epidemic is exploding across urban America, and Detroit was hit hard. In many neighborhoods, especially marginalized ones with high crime rates, residents felt completely abandoned by the police. They'd call 911, nobody comes, or they get a slow, dismissive response. They felt the authorities just couldn't or wouldn't help them deal with the crack houses, the dealers, the prostitution rings, setting up shop on their blocks.
So Devil's Night becomes an opportunity.
A really dark opportunity, yeah. They used the chaos of the night to, quote, clean house. They would deliberately target known crack houses, often abandoned buildings already, but they saw as a cancer spreading through their community.
So it's vigilantism, basically.
It is. A destructive, violent form of it. But for the people lighting those specific matches, they saw it as necessary surgery, removing the blight that the official system had failed to deal with.
Okay, so we have calculated financial crime and calculated vigilantism, but neither of those fully explains the sheer scale, right? The thousands of young people, teenagers mostly, just setting random fires all over.
Exactly. And that takes us to Motive C, the nihilistic festival.
The nihilistic festival.
This is the one that explains the scale. Why TV crews came from Japan, from Germany, just to film the spectacle. This involves thousands of young people, many of them born after Detroit's peak. They grew up literally surrounded by ruins, abandoned factories, crumbling houses. That was their normal landscape.
And facing pretty bleak prospects, I imagine. High unemployment, alienation.
Staggering unemployment, deep social alienation. Just this profound sense of hopelessness, feeling invisible to the rest of America. So think about it. If you grew up in those ruins and every empty building feels like a symbol of your own lack of future, the system's failure, what do you do?
Lash out.
The sources argue the fire became a form of agency. Burning down one of those empty buildings, a symbol of the decay oppressing you. It was a way to make noise, to demand attention, to force the world to look, at least for one night.
So the fire itself becomes the main event, the spectacle.
Precisely. It was this destructive, nihilistic festival, a temporary shared holiday of self-annihilation almost.
Yeah.
For 24 hours, young people who felt utterly powerless in their day-to-day lives could feel this immense sense of control, of destructive power. Power over the very symbols of the decay that defined their lives.
The fire was their scream.
That's exactly how multiple sources frame it. It was a scream and an expression of defiance, yes, but also of just deep, deep hopelessness. Basically saying, look what you left us with, now watch us burn it down.
Okay, let's zero in on that one night, October 30th, 1984. Let's ride along with Frank, our firefighter, again. Early evening starts. Maybe relatively normal. Routine calls, trash fires, maybe a small garage fire.
Yeah, it starts somewhat manageably. But as soon as the sun goes down, as darkness fully sets in, the system just breaks. The radio traffic just explodes. It goes from coordinated dispatching to just this overwhelming, non-stop roar of panic, distress calls coming from everywhere. Frank described the dispatch board lighting up like a Christmas tree from hell. Every light flashing.
And it wasn't just the number of calls, right? It was the density.
Exactly. Fires weren't just happening one after another. They were starting simultaneously, blocks apart. Often, one big building fire needed multiple engine companies. And remember that escalation we talked about, the intent.
Right, the shift towards targeting buildings.
The stats bear that out starkly for 84. Between 83 and 84, the number of confirmed arson-related building fires nearly quadrupled, from about 45 the year before to 170 in 84. They were deliberately going after the structures, burning the city's bones.
What did that mean for Frank on the ground, logistically?
It was a nightmare. His engine gets called to, say, a 3-story apartment building fully engulfed. They pull up to the nearest hydrant, and the water pressure is dangerously low. Because 3 other fire engines, just blocks away, are already hooked up to hydrants on the same water main, battling their own structure fires. The system was overloaded, crews were stretched incredibly thin. Often they weren't arriving to save the burning building anymore. Their goal became just containment, stop the fire from jumping to the next house, especially if it was occupied. Triage, essentially.
I have to ask, though, if this was an annual thing, didn't the city plan for it? Bring in help from the suburbs, mutual aid?
They did try to plan. They had command centers, canceled leave, put extra crews on, but the sheer scale of '84 just swamped everything. And yeah, some suburban departments did offer help, but sources say many were hesitant. They didn't want to send their crews and expensive trucks into that chaos, knowing the risks, knowing the hostility towards responders.
So Detroit Fire was largely on its own.
Largely on its own, facing a citywide catastrophe with not enough people, not enough working hydrants, not enough functioning equipment sometimes. It was overwhelming.
So Frank's crew, they're just running nonstop, from fire to fire. And what they found when they arrived, it wasn't always what you'd expect. You called it the carnival of destruction.
Yeah, that's the term that comes up. Frank would arrive at some of these huge fires, and instead of finding panicked residents desperate to get out, he'd find crowds, people gathered on street corners almost like it was a block party, watching the building burn with this weirdly festive, celebratory atmosphere. The destruction itself had become the entertainment.
The spectacle we talked about.
Exactly. There were reports of kids up on rooftops with binoculars, scanning the horizon for the next column of smoke, spotting the next fire. And you mentioned the fire buffs earlier, these amateur fire photographers and enthusiasts. They literally drove in from other states, like storm chasers heading towards a tornado, just to witness and document the inferno.
That just confirms that nihilistic element, doesn't it? The destruction was the show. The city's decay was the stage.
Mm-hmm. But then it got even darker. The attacks on the firefighters themselves.
Right. Frank's trying to connect his hose, do his job, save what he can, and suddenly a brick smashes off the side of the engine. Rocks start flying, hitting him, hitting his crewmates on their helmets, their arms, while they're wrestling with heavy hoses.
This is where that deep civic alienation just boils over into something truly awful. That upside-down world the sources talk about. The rescuer is now the enemy. The people attacking weren't trying to save the building. They were actively trying to stop the firefighters from saving it.
They weren't protecting people. They were protecting the event, protecting the fire itself.
It seems that way. Frank and his crew were seen as agents of that failed system, protecting the property of that system, not the community. They were interfering with this expression of power, this act of defiance, however destructive it was.
So Frank and his colleagues, they're fighting this losing battle, a war of attrition, one source called it, chasing fires all night in neighborhoods where the enemy was, quote, everywhere and nowhere.
The toll must have been immense. Physically, yes, crews working 48 hours straight sometimes. But emotionally, facing that hostility, running out of water, knowing you can't save everything, it's devastating.
And what about Eleanor? Back on her lawn with the hose, did she make it through?
She did. Her house survived. But it wasn't exactly a victory celebration. She spent the whole night basically rotating between soaking her own roof and watching helplessly as that abandoned house next door, the tinderbox she feared, burned itself to the ground. Even though her house was safe, the whole block was choked with smoke and ash, fighting to keep the flames contained just to that one lot. It was chaos.
And when dawn finally broke, after that peak 3-day period, the official count stood at 810 fires.
810. That number just burned itself into the city's history. 1984 became the year Detroit truly almost incinerated itself.
So Halloween morning, October 31st, 1984, what did the city look like? What did it feel like?
The sources paint a grim picture. A thick, heavy blanket of smoke and ash just hanging over everything, the sun struggling to cut through it, an acrid smell everywhere, and after the noise, the sirens, the shouting, just this heavy, suffocating silence.
Like a battlefield the morning after.
Exactly like a war zone. Eleanor's house was still standing, thankfully. But the house next door, just a smoldering ruin, as one account put it. There are these heartbreaking descriptions of kids having to be driven to school past piles of charred black timbers and debris, some of it still smoking. Just awful.
And the national media.
Oh, they were everywhere. Cameras rolling, reporters doing stand-ups in front of burned-out houses. Those images went around the world, cementing Detroit's reputation, fairly or unfairly, as America's great urban failure. The symbol of everything wrong with American cities.
So let's circle back. After seeing the horror of that night, the aftermath, we have to land on the why again. Devil's Night wasn't just crime waves or random madness. It really was this physical expression of utter hopelessness, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. It was the ritual sacrifice of the symbols of neglect. You had decades of systemic failure, economic collapse, political abandonment, racial division, all creating this environment, this generation, really, that felt like it had nothing left to lose.
The empty buildings were symbols of that failure. The fires were the ritual destruction of those symbols.
It was the city screaming for help, in the most painful, destructive way possible. A desperate, furious attempt to make the outside world finally pay attention to the agony it was in.
But if we just ended the story there, with the ashes and the despair, it would miss something crucial, something remarkable happened next.
That's right. Out of those ashes, the community itself rose up. They decided they weren't going to let this happen again. They decided to fight back.
And this is where Angel's Night comes in.
Exactly. Angel's Night, the name itself is powerful. If the night before Halloween belonged to the devils, they were going to reclaim it for the angels, for the guardians of the neighborhoods. And this wasn't just another top-down police strategy. This was driven by the citizens, by the Eleanors of Detroit, people saying, enough, we're taking our streets back.
How did it work? What did they actually do?
Well, the ideas started kind of small under Mayor Coleman Young, but it really took off and got organized under Mayor Dennis Archer in the 1990s. The key was mobilizing ordinary people, thousands and thousands of volunteers.
Doing what? Patrolling?
Yes, patrolling their own streets. They formed block clubs, neighborhood watch groups. They were given orange vests, maybe walkie-talkies. The goal was simple. Be visible, occupy the streets, deny the arsonists the empty, dark stage they needed.
And they use symbols too, right? To reclaim the night visually.
Powerful symbols, tying orange ribbons the color of hope, of vigilance around trees and lampposts, putting flashing amber lights on their own cars as they drove around. And maybe the simplest, most powerful thing. Everyone agreed to turn on their porch lights all night long, just lighting up the city, pushing back the darkness. A visible sign of community presence and defiance.
They also adopted the problem building.
Yes, that was brilliant. Groups would literally adopt the abandoned houses on their block. They'd sit out in lawn chairs in front of them, monitor them all night. It's a clear message. This derelict building isn't an easy target anymore. We're watching. This is still our space.
That feels incredibly powerful, a real act of civic reappropriation, as one source called it.
It really was. They weren't just preventing fires. They were performing this kind of symbolic exorcism.
Yeah.
Changing the narrative. It wasn't Detroit burning itself down anymore. It was Detroit saving itself through collective action, showing the world this is still our home and we will defend it.
And the amazing thing is, it worked. It wasn't just symbolic.
No, it demonstrably worked. The results were immediate and dramatic. The sources show that the year right after that 1984 peak, with the beginnings of Angel's Night, the number of fires was cut almost in half.
No, that quickly.
That quickly. And the numbers kept falling year after year as the Angel's Night effort grew and became more organized. It continued dropping steadily until by the early 2010s, Devil's Night, as this massive citywide firestorm, had effectively ended. It was no longer a major civic crisis.
That's incredible. It's just overwhelming proof, isn't it, that even faced with decades of neglect leading to this kind of nihilistic destruction, collective action, community unity, belief in your place, it can actually turn things around.
It really can. The residents, after being failed by the system for so long, they finally seized control of the narrative and their own safety.
So looking back at Detroit's Devil's Night, it's easy to just label it madness, some historical anomaly. But as we've seen, it was the result, maybe even the predictable result, of a community feeling utterly abandoned, invisible, gutted.
The fires were the scream. Loud, painful, undeniable.
Which brings us to our final thought. For you, listening, the destruction in Detroit took the form of fire, burning buildings, a very visible sacrifice. The question we want to leave you with is this. If the consequences of deep systemic neglect in our cities today don't manifest as fire, but maybe show up in other ways, maybe through different kinds of destruction, different forms of social chaos, could be crime waves, addiction crises, maybe deep political polarization and breakdown.
Are we sure we'd recognize that as the same kind of scream? As a symptom of the same deep disease?
Or will we just dismiss it as something else entirely, as just madness?
It's a really crucial question, isn't it? Are we just treating the symptom, or are we actually seeing and addressing the underlying illness?
Something to think about. Until the next deep dive.
And so, another chapter closes. For more journeys into history's forgotten files, please like and subscribe. Your next story awaits.